When I was doing research making this video, I Googled how to find your husband, and the results that showed up were horrendous. I was like, why are women, Googling this stuff? And then I typed in how to find your wife, and the results were worse. Basically explaining the problems with modern day relationships. I assume if you're watching this, you're a woman, and I want to preface this by saying, if you feel like you've been struggling attracting the right man into your life, recognize that the times have changed. The hormone testosterone has been on a rapid decline since the 1930s. Recently, I was listening to a Andrew Huberman podcast, which those of you who don't know him, he's a neurobiologist, and I was listening to this interview that he was conducting. He attributes a large percentage of this decline due to an increase in the usage of agricultural pesticides and phthalates, which are essentially just chemical compounds that are used to make plastics more durable. And so I went back and I decided to dig a little bit deeper into this topic to just really understand where this all started. And so just before World War II, Paul Mueller, he's this Swiss chemist, he discovers this chemical compound called DDT. It stands for dichlorodephanyl trichloroethane, and it's essentially this pesticide that kills insects.
It begins with the war-born development of DDT. This diabolical weapon of modern science saved millions of humans, but killed billions of insects. Man, with this newly discovered force, has at long last.
And this was a revolutionary discovery because prior to this, from 1860 to 1865, historians speculate that roughly 185,000 soldiers died during the Civil War due to diseases that could have been cured. And so fast forward now back to the 1940s, you've got the US government and other governments now jumping on this discovery because a lot of these diseases are being carried by ticks and fleas and mosquitoes that carry typhus and malaria, things like that. And so what they began to do was issue these soldiers that were, overseas, DDT powder, and word spread back to the US. And so you have farmers that are now using this on their crops. And eventually these pesticides became much stronger, and agricultural groups get into these disputes with reformers who were seeking to place restrictions on these pesticides that were being manufactured because they'd be showing up on people's food and they were ingesting it. But when the soldiers came back from the war, they act fine, there's no health ailments that are occurring. That whole dispute basically bypassed any sort of argument, and so these were now legal. And so by 1952, they approved almost 10,000 new variations of this chemical. They developed new pesticides that would eventually be into effect today, a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it wasn't realized until much later that these chemicals were so hazardous towards human health, in so much so that it would disrupt estrogen and testosterone in the development of men and women. And, we're talking about testosterone here. Well, why is this important? Because it's when you live in an environment and consume products that work against your body's natural biology, you begin to break down the very composition of what makes a man a man. Testosterone is the primary hormone in men that isn't just responsible for the development of the reproductive system, regulating its health, but it's responsible for behavioral characteristics like drive, ambition, motivation, challenge, like things that are really important. From a hormonal perspective, it's not incorrect to say that men from the 1940s are twice the men that we are today. And this is all thanks to the chemical age that we now live in. So now you have this main issue, right? Now introduce an aggressive feminist agenda that has sought to redefine the roles of men and women in society, along with 24/7 access to pornography, video games, fast food, cheap pleasure, an abundance of options on dating apps. It's now you've stripped a man of pursuing anything meaningful in life because he's too distracted. He's too enamored with what's in front of him. And if he's not distracted, then he's confused. According to a recent study by the US's Census Bureau's current population survey, children living with only a single mother is the second most common living arrangement, a number that has doubled since 1968. So now you have men without fathers and moms being forced to fill the gaps and play the role of the mom and the dad in these family dynamics. And the reason I outline all of this is before you go blaming yourself for maybe, you know, not having attracted like a masculine, healthy man, consider the times. Maybe it's not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of the society that we've created. So this is something you need to consider when sifting through your desire for companionship, which is natural and healthy, versus maybe some of this internalized frustration that you have with yourself in light of this societal decline. All right, so now that we've got this all out of the way, now we can get into the bulk of this video. If you want to know how to attract a healthy masculine man into your life, you need to understand how to fan the flame, so to speak, of your femininity. This is your superpower, and it will attract and hold a man's attention like nothing else. And a lot of women don't know how to use this, in my opinion, to their advantage. And in fact, most women now are more masculine than ever due to the changing of times, which isn't necessarily all a bad thing, right? It's like you're very independent, you're very capable, you're goal-oriented, you're focused, you do everything yourself, rarely asking for help. And these qualities are very helpful in the workplace, but they don't always transition well into, you know, your dating life. In fact, a lot of successful women have particularly a difficult time in dating and attracting the right man. So the issue is, how do you tap into your femininity in a way that attracts a masculine man, a man that you desired to have companionship with? You have to reconnect with this softer side. Understand that the feminine allure is a very powerful thing, and every man responds to it universally. It's within our DNA to desire that. Taking this a step further, going beyond male attraction, this journey that you have with this broad, vast landscape of femininity ought to be synonymous in a way with soul searching. It's like you can dress in pink, wear makeup, do all of these things to adorn yourself with, you know, feminine sort of ornaments. At the end of the day, that core nature that you have will outshine any of these, you know, feminine attributes. So rest assured, it's like if you like wearing darker clothes, if you like horror movies as opposed to romantic movies, if you like listening to Drake over T Swift, these things make very little difference. They don't matter. So what's most important is that you stay true to yourself. So now I want to talk about 5 qualities that I think are good in helping a woman attract a man that she wants to be with. First one is empathy. It's like, can you provide him space where he feels emotionally vulnerable to talk about his day, to talk about his problems? Are you able to evoke that soft side that he has within himself? It's like, be genuinely interested in what's going on in his life. Cultivate an ability to listen deeply when he's wanting to share ideas with you, or when he is just talking with you about whatever. The second thing would be to let him lead. This means letting him pursue you, letting him be the first one to ask you out, letting him decide where he wants to take you out to dinner. If you feel like the only way to maintain his attention is by always being the first one to ask him out, always being the first one to text him, then to be honest, there's a good chance that he's not the one. Feel free to initiate with him in times, but learn to receive his efforts of pursuing you. Let him be the one to work for you, to do things for you. And honestly, if this is a foreign concept or something that doesn't feel comfortable with you, I want to encourage you to ask yourself, how worthy of love do you really feel? Many women will block or subconsciously impede a man's advances, not because she necessarily is uninterested, but because she might have trouble receiving affections from others. Realize that many problems you might be having in a relationship can be traced back to moments where your trust might have been broken. You dated a guy, he lied, he cheated on you. Maybe you grew up in a household where one of your parents was absent, and so naturally your trust is broken. It's not necessarily your fault, but it's still your responsibility to acknowledge it, heal from it, and move on. Intimacy between two people is like a muscle that has to be exercised. And it's going to be difficult to tend to this garden if your soil is dried up, it's got contaminants in it. You need like a moist, soft soil to grow into, to sow into. You got to get that Miracle-Gro potting mix. That stuff works. So learn to love yourself. Understand self-worth is very heavily correlated with how well you're going to be able to receive love from another human being. And the paradox with this is that the more that you give to yourself, the more others are going to want to give towards you. So the third thing is to set realistic expectations. A good relationship isn't found, it's created. This is a concept I learned from Sahil Bloom, where he's talking about there's no such thing as a perfect relationship. Instead, he says real love is loving the imperfections in the other person. He's not saying ignore the red flags, tolerate bad behavior. He's saying truthfully, love would not be love without these elements of grace, being able to look past someone's flaws and choosing to love them despite. The fourth thing is just to be patient, slow down. One thing that I encourage you as a woman to actually take the lead on, especially early on within your relationship, is when it comes to physical intimacy. A commitment-minded man who's genuinely interested in you is not going to have a problem waiting. While setting boundaries early on, you're communicating a level of desirability. You don't have to play hard to get, but let him work for you. Like, let him prove his level of interest towards you.
You're gonna be seeing an awful lot of this around the house.
Oh, baby. Yeah, mommy. Yeah.
But no touching.
And the reason this is important is, like, just being familiar with the male species, you're gonna know really quick if this guy just is interested in sex, or if he's genuinely curious and wants to get to know you. The less time you can waste with non-committal or sexually impulsive men, the better. So the paradox here is that by slowing down, you speed up the process of determining compatibility. The last thing, and arguably one of the most important, is you need to have a very clear understanding and vision of roughly 5 to 7 non-negotiables of what you want in a man. It's very important that you have similar values, and a lot of the times what happens is you get into a bad relationship and you find yourself justifying bad behavior that you would not have tolerated prior this relationship. And yes, there's going to be disagreements, yes, there's going to be arguments, but don't overlook behavioral patterns in hopes that things eventually may or may not get better. It's like we all know 1 or 2 people that continue to stay in toxic relationships. It is a classic example of cognitive dissonance, because I guarantee you, it's like if you were to ask these people who are in toxic relationships, oh, what do you want, and what do you want in a man, what do you want in a woman, they would actually say a lot of good things, like, oh, I want this and that and this and that. And it's like, okay, but it's like the person that they're with does the exact opposite. And if you were to ask her, why do you tolerate this, she might say something like, yes, but I love him. What she's actually saying is, this is all I know. Do not mistake the feelings of familiarity for feeling genuinely safe in a relationship. Familiarity likes to counterfeit itself as safety. In reality, it's just familiar. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's a gravitation towards what you've been conditioned to believe as safe. So that's why having an outline of these non-negotiables is so important. Have a framework that immediately eliminates 70 to 75% of men. Then get to know the 1 or 2 and go from there. So anyways, guys, that's today's video. I hope this helps. Feel free to message me on Instagram if you guys have any questions or things. I would love to help you out. And thank you so much for watching.